Sarah looks like any other business passenger. But she's hiding a secret. She's a trained F-16 fighter pilot. When the captain has a heart attack at 37,000 feet, Sarah must choose: stay hidden or reveal her military skills to save 178 lives aboard the doomed aircraft. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. Sarah Chen adjusted her navy blazer and checked her watch as she sat in the departure lounge at Chicago O'Hare International Airport. To every observer, she was just another business traveler, professional, composed, unremarkable. Her leather briefcase sat neatly beside her chair, and she held a financial magazine with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to frequent flying. Nothing in her appearance suggested the extraordinary background that lay beneath her carefully cultivated civilian persona. "Good afternoon. Flying to Denver on business?" asked Jenny, a cheerful flight attendant who had approached with boarding passes in hand. Sarah looked up with a polite smile. "Yes, just a quick trip." "What line of work are you in, if you don't mind me asking?" Jenny's friendly curiosity was genuine, the kind of small talk that filled the mundane moments of air travel. Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with this question. For a split second, her mind flashed to images of F-16 fighting falcons screaming through desert skies, the weight of a helmet on her head, the precise choreography of combat maneuvers executed at supersonic speeds. But she pushed those memories down as she always did. "Consulting. Risk management," she replied, the practiced response rolling off her tongue with well-rehearsed ease. "Oh, how interesting. Well, we'll have you boarding in just a few minutes," Jenny said before moving on to assist other passengers. Sarah returned to her magazine, though she wasn't really reading. The words blurred slightly as she thought about the careful dance she performed every day, hiding who she really was, what she'd done, what she was capable of. 8 years as an Air Force pilot with over 2,000 hours in F-16s. Combat missions over Afghanistan. Test pilot training. A safety record that was virtually spotless. But people rarely believed it when she told them. The skeptical looks, the condescending questions, the assumption that she must have been a transport pilot or worked in logistics. It was easier to simply avoid the conversation altogether. 20 minutes later, Sarah made her way down the jet bridge toward United Flight 847, a Boeing 737-800 bound for Denver. The familiar smell of aviation fuel and recycled air filled her nostrils, triggering a complex mix of emotions. She loved flying more than almost anything, but commercial aviation felt strangely disconnected from the pure, raw experience of military flight. As she settled into seat 12A by the window, Sarah noticed the businessman taking the middle seat beside her. Mike, as he introduced himself, was already pulling out his laptop and apologizing for the inevitable work session. "Sorry, hope you don't mind if I work during the flight." "Big presentation tomorrow," he said, his tone suggesting he was accustomed to dominating conversations with strangers. "Not at all," Sarah replied politely. "I'm Mike, by the way. What do you do?" The question came with the casual entitlement of someone who assumed his own importance and expected others to accommodate his curiosity. Sarah felt her shoulders tense slightly. "I work with operational systems. Risk assessment. Insurance? My wife's in that field. Lots of paperwork, I bet." Mike's assumption was immediate and dismissive, the kind of casual categorization that had followed Sarah throughout her post-military career. She nodded noncommittally and turned toward the window as the engines began their familiar whine. Through the small porthole, she could see ground crew members directing the pushback tractor, their movements precise and coordinated. Everything about airport operations reminded her of the military: the protocols, the safety procedures, the split-second timing that kept thousands of flights moving safely through the sky every day. The Boeing 737 was a far cry from an F-16. Where the fighter jet was a marvel of precision engineering designed for speed and agility, the commercial aircraft was built for efficiency and passenger comfort. Sarah's trained eye automatically cataloged the differences she couldn't see but knew were there: the fly-by-wire systems versus mechanical controls, the redundant safety features, the completely different approach to navigation and communication. Captain James Rodriguez and First Officer Lisa Park ran through their pre-flight checklist in the cockpit, their voices carrying the routine professionalism of pilots who had performed these procedures thousands of times. Sarah found herself unconsciously following along with their preparation, her mind automatically processing the familiar rhythms of pre-flight protocols. As Flight 847 taxied toward the runway, Sarah's attention was drawn to the subtle vibrations of the aircraft, the changing pitch of the engines, the gentle banking turns as they moved through the airport's complex taxiway system. Most passengers barely noticed these details, But for Sarah, each sensation told a story about the aircraft's performance and the pilot's skill. The takeoff was smooth and professional. Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom with the standard welcome message, weather information and estimated flight time of 2 hours and 15 minutes. Sarah closed her eyes as the 737 climbed steadily toward its cruising altitude of 37,000 feet, feeling the familiar pressure changes in her ears and the gradual leveling off that indicated they had reached their assigned flight level. For the first hour of the flight, everything proceeded normally. Mike worked on his presentation, occasionally glancing at Sarah as if expecting her to show interest in his spreadsheets. Other passengers read, slept, or stared out windows at the patchwork landscape below. The flight attendants moved efficiently through the cabin, serving drinks and responding to the occasional request for extra pillows or assistance with overhead bins. Sarah had almost drifted off to sleep when she felt something that made every nerve in her body snap to attention. It was subtle, a slight change in the aircraft's attitude, a barely perceptible shift in engine pitch, a deviation from the smooth, steady flight characteristics that should have been maintained at cruising altitude. Her eyes opened immediately and she found herself unconsciously straightening in her seat, her pilot's instincts fully engaged. Around her, other passengers seemed oblivious to the change, but Sarah's finely tuned senses detected something amiss. The intercom crackled to life, but instead of the calm, professional voice of Captain Rodriguez, they heard First Officer Park's voice, strained and urgent. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a medical emergency in the cockpit. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened while we address the situation." The cabin erupted in worried murmurs and nervous laughter. Mike looked up from his laptop with mild concern, but most passengers seemed to assume it was a minor issue that would be quickly resolved. Sarah, however, felt ice form in her stomach. She knew exactly what medical emergency in the cockpit likely meant, and she understood the implications far better than anyone else on the aircraft. Minutes passed with no further updates. The aircraft's flight path remained steady, but Sarah could detect subtle irregularities that suggested the single remaining pilot was struggling to manage both flying duties and whatever crisis had unfolded in the cockpit. Her military training had taught her to recognize the early signs of system stress, and every instinct told her that Flight 847 was in serious trouble. Jenny, the flight attendant who had chatted with Sarah at the gate, moved quickly through the cabin with a forced smile that didn't quite mask her concern. When she reached Sarah's row, their eyes met, and Sarah saw something that confirmed her worst fears, barely controlled panic. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Sarah asked quietly, her voice carrying a calm authority that seemed to catch Jenny off guard. We're looking for anyone with medical training," Jenny whispered. "The captain collapsed and the first officer is trying to handle everything alone." Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that had carried her through countless high-stress situations in military aircraft. But this time, it was complicated by the knowledge that revealing her capabilities would shatter the carefully constructed facade she had maintained for years. "I have experience with emergency situations," she said carefully. "I might be able to assist." Jenny looked at her with surprise, clearly not expecting such an offer from someone she had pegged as a typical business consultant. "What kind of experience?" The moment of truth had arrived. Sarah could continue her charade and hope that someone else would step forward, or she could reveal who she really was and face the consequences. The safety of 178 souls hung in the balance. "I'm a pilot," she said simply. "Military trained. F-16s." Jenny's eyes widened in shock and disbelief. "You're a fighter pilot?" "Former. 8 years Air Force. If your first officer needs help, I can assist with flying the aircraft." The transformation was immediate and profound. Jenny's entire demeanor changed as she processed this information, her expression shifting from polite courtesy to something approaching awe and desperate hope. "Please," Jenny whispered. "Come with me." As Sarah unbuckled her seatbelt and stood, Mike grabbed her arm. "Wait, you're actually a pilot? A real pilot?" "Yes," she said, gently but firmly removing his hand. "And right now, that might be the only thing standing between everyone on this plane and disaster." The walk to the cockpit felt like the longest of Sarah's life. Around her, 178 passengers continued their conversations, read their books, and dozed in their seats, blissfully unaware that their lives were about to depend on a woman they had assumed was nothing more than another anonymous business traveler. At the cockpit door, Jenny spoke briefly with another flight attendant before entering the security code. The door opened to reveal a scene that would have terrified most people but filled Sarah with familiar, focused determination. Captain Rodriguez lay unconscious on the cockpit floor, his face pale and his breathing shallow. First Officer Park sat in the right seat, her hands trembling slightly as she attempted to manage both her flying duties and monitor the captain's condition. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool cockpit temperature. "Lisa," Jenny said urgently, "this passenger is a pilot. She says she can help." Park looked up with exhausted, desperate eyes. "What kind of pilot?" "F-16s. Air Force," Sarah replied, already moving toward the captain's seat. "How long has he been unconscious?" "About 10 minutes. I think it was a heart attack. I've been trying to fly the plane and call for medical advice, but I'm barely keeping up with everything." Sarah knelt beside Captain Rodriguez, quickly checking his pulse and breathing. Her military medical training kicked in immediately, stable but unconscious, likely a cardiac event, requiring immediate medical attention upon landing but not immediately life-threatening. "He's stable for now," she told Park. "But we need to get this aircraft on the ground as soon as possible." "What's our current status?" "We're at 37,000 feet, about 90 minutes from Denver. I've already declared a medical emergency with ATC, but I haven't told them about the flying situation." Sarah slid into the captain's seat with practiced ease, her hands immediately finding the controls that were both familiar and foreign. The Boeing 737's yoke felt different from an F-16 stick, heavier and less responsive, but the fundamental principles were the same. She quickly scanned the instrument panel, her military training allowing her to rapidly assess the aircraft's systems despite the unfamiliar layout. "Talk to me about the aircraft," she said to Park. "Any mechanical issues? Fuel status? Weather ahead?" "All systems normal, fuel is good for another 3 hours, weather is clear," Park replied, her voice already sounding more confident now that she had support. Sarah keyed the radio. "Denver Center, United 847. We have an update on our emergency status." "United 847, Denver Center. Go ahead." "Center, be advised our captain is incapacitated and we have a qualified pilot assisting the first officer. We're requesting priority handling for immediate approach and landing at the nearest suitable airport." There was a pause before the controller responded. "United 847, understand captain incapacitated. Confirm you have qualified replacement pilot?" Sarah felt Park's eyes on her, along with Jenny's from the cockpit doorway. This was the moment when her carefully guarded secret became public knowledge, when the comfortable anonymity she had maintained for years would disappear forever. "Affirmative, Center. Former Air Force pilot, current passenger taking over captain duties." The radio crackled with professional acknowledgement, but Sarah could detect the underlying surprise in the controller's voice. "Roger, United 847. We're vectoring you direct to Denver International. Stand by for approach instructions." As Sarah began coordinating with air traffic control and managing the aircraft's descent, she became acutely aware of the differences between her F-16 experience and commercial aviation. The Boeing was larger, heavier, more stable but less responsive. Where the fighter jet responded instantly to her inputs, the commercial aircraft required more anticipation and smoother control movements. The approach phase would be the most challenging. In an F-16, landings were aggressive, fast affairs with drag chutes and arresting gear available if needed. A commercial aircraft required a much more gentle touch, precise speed control, and consideration for passenger comfort throughout the descent. "Lisa," Sarah said to Park, "I need you to handle all radio communications and monitor our systems. I'll focus on flying the aircraft. Talk me through your standard approach procedures." As they began their descent toward Denver, word of the situation spread through the cabin. Jenny had quietly informed the other flight attendants, who in turn had discreetly shared the information with a few passengers. The reaction was exactly what Sarah had expected and dreaded: surprise, disbelief, and then a mixture of relief and intense scrutiny. Mike, the businessman who had assumed she worked in insurance, stared at her empty seat with his mouth slightly open. Around the cabin, passengers whispered to each other, trying to process the fact that the unremarkable woman in the navy blazer was now the only thing standing between them and potential disaster. In the cockpit, Sarah fought her own internal battle while managing the complex approach. Every decision she made would be scrutinized, every action analyzed not just for its technical merit but through the lens of gender and expectation. She had spent years proving herself in a male-dominated field, earning respect through performance and professionalism, only to have that hard-won credibility constantly questioned. But as Denver International Airport appeared on the horizon, her focus narrowed to the essential task at hand. The approaches she had flown in F-16s, often under combat conditions, had prepared her for this moment. The precision required, the split-second decision-making, the ability to remain calm under extreme pressure. All of it translated directly to her current situation. United 847, you're cleared for approach runway 34 right. Emergency equipment is standing by, came the voice from the tower. Sarah could see the airport clearly now, the long concrete runways stretching across the Colorado landscape. Fire trucks and ambulances were positioned along the runway, their red and white lights creating a stark reminder of what was at stake. The descent was textbook perfect. Sarah's military training had taught her to fly with mathematical precision, and she applied that knowledge to the Boeing's approach. Airspeed control, glide path management, crosswind correction, each element executed with the kind of exactness that came from years of high-stakes flying. Beautiful approach, Park said quietly, her voice filled with admiration and relief. As the main landing gear touched down on runway 34 right, Sarah felt the familiar satisfaction of a successful mission completed. The Boeing 737 rolled smoothly down the runway, its passengers safe and unaware of how close they had come to potential catastrophe. Emergency medical personnel boarded immediately to attend to Captain Rodriguez, while airport authorities began the process of debriefing the crew and investigating the incident. Sarah found herself surrounded by officials, reporters, and curious onlookers, all eager to learn more about the former fighter pilot who had saved Flight 847. In the terminal, as passengers deplaned and reunited with worried family members, Sarah's carefully maintained anonymity was gone forever. Mike approached her with a mixture of embarrassment and gratitude, struggling to reconcile the woman he had dismissed as an insurance worker with the skilled pilot who had just saved his life. I'm sorry, he said awkwardly. I had no idea who you were. Sarah looked at him with tired eyes. That was the point, she replied. I spent years learning to be invisible, to avoid exactly this kind of situation. But sometimes being invisible isn't an option. Jenny, the flight attendant who had first spoken with Sarah, approached with tears in her eyes. I don't know how to thank you, she said. You saved everyone on that plane. I did what anyone with my training would have done, Sarah replied, though she knew that wasn't entirely true. Not everyone would have spoken up, would have revealed themselves, would have taken on the enormous responsibility of 178 lives. In the days that followed, Sarah's story became national news. She was interviewed by television reporters, profiled in aviation magazines, and hailed as a hero by countless strangers. The attention was both gratifying and exhausting, a vindication of her skills and training but also a constant reminder of how rare it was for women to be recognized for their aviation expertise. The Federal Aviation Administration's investigation concluded that Sarah's intervention had been crucial to the flight's safe outcome. First Officer Park, while competent and professional, had been overwhelmed by the dual responsibilities of flying the aircraft and managing a medical emergency. Sarah's assistance had not only ensured passenger safety but had prevented what could have been a catastrophic accident. Captain Rodriguez recovered fully from his heart attack and returned to flying after appropriate medical clearance. He personally thanked Sarah, acknowledging that her quick thinking and skilled flying had saved not only the passengers but his own life as well. For Sarah, the aftermath of Flight 847 represented a fundamental change in how she moved through the world. The carefully constructed facade of anonymity was gone, replaced by recognition and respect but also constant scrutiny. People now knew who she was, what she was capable of, and she could never again blend invisibly into a crowd of business travelers. But as she reflected on that day, sitting in her apartment and looking at the countless thank you letters from passengers and their families, Sarah realized that her years of hiding had come to an end for a reason. The skills she had developed in F-16 cockpits, the precision and courage that military training had instilled in her, had found their ultimate purpose not in combat but in the quiet heroism of saving civilian lives. The story of United Flight 847 became more than just an aviation incident. It became a testament to the value of military training, the importance of remaining calm under pressure, and the reality that heroes often walk among us unrecognized, waiting for the moment when their unique skills and experience can make the difference between tragedy and triumph. Sarah Chen would never again be just another anonymous passenger. She had proven, beyond any possible doubt, that her fighter pilot training had prepared her not just for war, but for any crisis that might arise at 37,000 feet. And in saving 178 lives, she had also saved herself from a lifetime of hiding who she really was.